Not much. Didn't go back to the kids.
All right.
Oh, there's
Good evening. I'm District Secretary Nancy Campbell Hatfield. It's Tuesday, February 5th, 2013, and tonight is a regular board meeting of the Dublin San Ramon Services District Board of Directors. Presiding this evening is Director Don Benson, President Don Benson. Call to order. Let's stand up and salute the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, roll call, please.
here.
Director Howard.
Here.
Director Duarte.
Here.
Vice President Leopold. Here. President Benson. Here. Excellent. Okay, so special announcements and activities.
Yes, President Benson, we have a couple of newer employees to introduce to the board tonight, or perhaps introduce the board to them tonight. And I don't know, Dan, if you're going to lead that, or Levi?
Actually, Levi's here tonight. He's going to do the honors.
President Benson, members of the board, so I'm here to proudly introduce you to two of our newer operators at the wastewater treatment plant, Anna Garcia and Aaron Castro. So first, Anna and her husband Frank live here in Livermore, here in Dublin. They have three children, Kyle, Heather, and Brian. Anna grew up in Oakland. She's done some coursework at UCLA, Cal State East Bay, and Anna is also a student from our AQUI program, Bay Area Consortium for wastewater education, where Raj Gumber, our laboratory supervisor, and myself are instructors in that program. So Anna was identified as one of the top students in that program, and so we're very happy to have her here. And before getting into wastewater, Anna had a career in financial management, so you didn't hear this, John. I guess she decided that her career in wastewater was a little cleaner than work. Then we have Aaron. Aaron grew up in San Jose. He and his wife Tiffany live in Livermore. They have 6 children: Tatiana, Aaron Jr., Kiana, Karen, Milea, and Isaiah, and they live, I don't know if I mentioned, they live in Livermore. Aaron is a product of the Tri-Valley ROP program. He started out as a temporary employee here at DSRSD for me about 6 years or so ago. And then after that, he went over and worked for a very good friend of mine, Brian Hill, at West County Sanitation District for the last 5.5 years or so. And so despite the fact that I'm not as good of a guy as Brian had worked for, he decided to come back. So that's about it. So Aaron and Anna.
Welcome.
Yeah,
Welcome. Yes. All right, next up, any other announcements?
No.
Okay, public comment. At this time, we'll offer, we are opening the floor to public comment. Any blue cards? No. Okay, we'll move on. Reports by the general manager.
Yes, President Benson and members of the board, I'll be very brief tonight. Schedule-wise, you have a regular board meeting coming up 2 weeks from now, February 19th on Tuesday evening. Nothing unusual about that. But at that meeting, we want to start a discussion among the board about revisions to our current strategic plan. It's still in a state of flux. I'm still soliciting input from a number of people. We think we're going to bring it together. And depending on what the agenda is like for that night, we may ask you, like we've done in the past, and Director Gorky, this will be the first time for you, have actually a special meeting started a little bit early so we can sort of focus on the strategic plan and kind of a workshop setting to do that. And what I'm really doing is asking you if your schedules could accommodate maybe a 5 o'clock start that day if we chose to do it. Don't write it down yet, but would that be something that would be workable? I'm just trying to figure out what kind of flexibility I have as we plan.
Yeah, I think
it's workable. Okay. The second thing I would note is we've had a lot of committee meetings since our last board meeting. All the minutes are in front of you with one exception, and that's the four-way liaison meeting that we had on January 14th with Zone 7. The liaison meetings are always, as you know, a little bit take a little bit longer to prepare the minutes for those meetings, so those will be coming up. Of course, any of the members that were there can perhaps comment on it. I thought it was a very good meeting, by the way. And the last thing in terms of correspondence to and from the board, we received correspondence dated February 4th, 2013, directed actually to Ms. Dawn Benson as president of the board, but all the board members were copied on it. It was from Mr. Jim Tong of Charter Properties requesting an extension of water and sewer capacity rights for one of his projects. And that's the only correspondence we've had to or from the board since the last board meeting that I'm aware of. And I think that concludes my report tonight.
Okay, good. Committee reports and agenda management. Any action on agenda management? Approval of minutes. Do I hear
I move for
motion?
approval of minutes for January 8th.
Second. Perfect, all in favor? Aye. Okay, so moved. Consent calendar. Do I hear a motion?
I'll move approval.
Okay, second. Second. To Duarte, Director Duarte. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, passed. Now we're on to board business. Review water rate study for compliance with policy directives and schedule a public hearing date. Mr. Archer.
President, if I could offer a few comments. We're actually going to have sort of a tag team. I'm just going to introduce the topic very briefly, and then John will take it over, followed by our consultants. But I just wanted to lay the stage for you. The board and staff have been talking about our water rates now for, depending on how you look at it, someplace between 6 and 12 months. And we've received a lot of policy direction from the board over that period of time. We believe that the rate study that HDR, our consultant, has completed has incorporated that policy direction from the board and has resulted in a study that will be presented to the public and to you, ultimately for your consideration. Your only action tonight, you're not really delivering the rate study. The Finance Committee looked at the rate study at their special meeting last week and concluded that it basically conformed to the policy direction that we received. So we check that off. And really this is an informational briefing for the board so that you're familiar with what's in the rate study, because it will very shortly go public and there'll be questions and perhaps press about it. So it's to inform you, and it's also to allow you to schedule a hearing for your actual that will be followed by your actual deliberation. We're targeting, I believe, on April 16th for that. So that's really your action tonight. Now, of course, in hearing the presentation, if the board collectively had concern with the rate study, we'd certainly want to hear that and consider what to do with it. But we really don't need any action to go forward from this point. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to John.
President Benson, board members that were able to lead in my presentation will really just to kind of bring everybody up to speed with what's gone on for the last, I guess, year plus that we've been considering this rate study. So the rate structure that we currently have was adopted in 2009. HDR helped us with that. That was a new rate structure for us, one that helped us achieve some of our water conservation goals that we have. The rates that we have in that structure have been updated annually for CPI, the most recent one being January 1 of this year, and that was a 2.8% CPI increase. Some recent events over the last year, you're aware of many of these, but I guess the first item was that the district refinanced its water debt a year ago, and in that debt document we have a minimum debt coverage requirement of 1.2 times or 120% of the annual debt payment that's in that. Also, as a result of the financing and the recent water capacity fee update, the operations of the district, the water enterprise, is responsible for a portion of the debt, and that's being rolled in and included in these rates. We've also, the DERWA system has become fully operational, and with that we are setting aside money for future potential replacement of that system now that it is up in operation. This would be the first time that we are considering that in a rate and in the upcoming budget. The water system, the growth rates have improved since things fell apart kind of in 2008. We've had some connections already this year. They're not quite back to levels that they were before, in the years before the fall down in 2008. Water usage, when we raised the rates and went to the water saving rates, we've seen the water usage dropped. It stabilized in the last 2 years. Actually, Bert was mentioning recently in staff discussion, we've seen a little bit of an uptick maybe, but the water usage has now stabilized from what it was earlier in 2008 and 2009. And we've been in a water shortage situation, we call it stage 1 water rates, since 2009, and water shortage rates have been in effect since that time. That is, maybe Bert can help me here, that will be a separate action of the board that will be considered later.
On April 16th, you'll approve the rate structure, and then at a later date in May, once we have a clearer picture for what the water situation is for this calendar year, once the water season is over, then you make a decision as to which stage of conservation baseline you're in, stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, going forward. So that's sort of set to approve the rate structure, and then later, when you have a date, you approve which rate stage.
So that was just kind of a major background of the things we've been considering with the rates that you have before you. Finance Committee has given staff strategic direction as to how to proceed with the rates. First and foremost was to help meet the funding requirements of the debt covenant. One thing we wanted is to have a stable source of revenue, so one of the directions was to fix the fixed component of rates at 25% of the revenue requirement. And that gives us a stable revenue source throughout the year. Next guideline was that the rates must cover the enterprise, the water enterprise share of the debt requirement that it picked up that we just mentioned. The next was a discussion of the coverage ratio that we should have, because the capacity fees are not something that we can really plan each year. We take an estimate of it based on engineering's input. We felt, well, the direction was given that the rate should cover at least a minimum of the 1.2 coverage ratio that we have in the debt covenants. It was also added that when we target and we budget, we should plan for 1.6 when we consider the capacity fees that will be coming in the year. We were also directed to begin funding replacement for the DERWA assets that we mentioned. And then our final direction was that the rates that we developed, that HDR developed for us, should be applied equitably to all and minimize the impact to the low-income users and the low-end users of the district. So, HDR, who we worked with previously, so Tom Gould and Sean Korn, who are here tonight, are the same team that developed the last rate. They perform an assessment, and they'll go through this, but they decide the revenue requirements, what money we will need. They'll look at the cost of service by the different groupings we have, and then they'll design the rate. The revenue requirements were based on the policy direction that were given by Finance Committee, And then the rates were, in fact, developed, and we adjusted them as we went along and reviewed with the committee to make sure that they attempted to be equitable across all lines. So the study results, in summary, we think we've met all the policy directives that were given. The rates will generate about 4% additional revenue across the board. The fixed costs are increased to 25% of the revenue requirement. You will see actually some of the variable rates drop to balance out the increase that's in the fixed component. Another change that's in here is the tier structure will change slightly. Tier 1, which was previously 1 to 20 CCF or units, is now only 1 to 10. So that 1 to 10 is the bottom, or the 10% of users, the lowest 10% users in the district. Tier 2 is then 11 to 34. It was 21 to 34. That's 70% of the residential users in the district. And Tier 3 would be the remaining 20%. The last part is the normal rates, not the savings rates, would be based on the current consumption levels that the district has.
What percentage of our folks are in that group that's going to jump from tier 1 to tier 3? In other words, the 11 to...
What percentage was it? You explain that, Dave. Do you remember?
We know that, we do not know that here.
No.
Do you know that?
I can go grab it.
Why don't you, well, let's let the
We'll
discussion
keep
go.
going.
Yeah, well,
Let's, Herman, why don't you go, let's see if you look at it.
I just wondering if it's, in other words, when we went, now we're at 10, the bottom here, and then 70 in the middle. Was it, like 30 and 40?
Good question.
Yeah, we'll ask. I don't remember. So, I guess, big things from these results is, with these rates, as proposed, the TIP can be fully suspended. And there is no increase in here for Zone 7. There's nothing planned for this year. That's a big impact. There's also no increase on the power charge. It's currently at 28 cents. And the limited access rate, which is a special rate for Alameda County, would also not change. So a couple of things that are not changing and big. And the Zone 7 is 45% of the total rate revenue. The study will also present you the water shortage rates, which you'll see in the table. We'll adopt eventually a normal rate, and then the 4 stages of water shortage rates, so that they are in place, and should we need to adopt them, they will have been adopted at the same time as all the other rates available and ready to go, which is exactly the structure we have right now. And the next step, so Finance Committee on January 30 reviewed the results for compliance with the policy. Excuse compliance being all the way over there to the left. Tonight you will receive the report and set a date for the public hearing, as Bert mentioned. External Affairs tomorrow will consider a plan we have for outreach. The notice, the Prop 218 notice, was mailed by the 22nd. It takes a little time to get everything pulled together and for the mailing house to actually get it out on the street. And so that will set us up with a 45-day period, which will close on the 18th, and then we will proposing to have the public hearing on the 16th of April. And the rates we right now propose to have effective on July 1. So hopefully that gives you just some background. We have some examples here. There's some in the report, just quick overview. So the lowest level, which is the people that are in the low-income user group, these are people that would be in the LEA program, they will actually see their monthly bill drop $6. And the reason that is, that's kind of the way it works. More of their fee is in fixed fee, and that is covered under the LEA program. So their bill will actually go down. That's some of that attempt to get minimize the impact on the low-income user. If they use 10 units per month and they're not in Leah, the bill would go up 87 cents on a monthly basis. So different users, 19 units, which is an average winter user for a residential customer, the monthly bill would go up $1.59. At 30 units, which is an average summer user, that bill would actually only go up 62 cents. And that, you're seeing some of the impact of that variable rate dropping with that customer. And then just another way of looking at it, 23 units, which is an average annual user, give it to you a whole bunch of ways here, that bill would go up $1.30. So this is just an attempt to frame for you the report you'll hear and the numbers that you're considering. At this point, before I introduce HDR, are there any questions?
Questions?
Urban, did you guys end?
Yes, 30%.
30%?
30% shift. There were 30% of our customers were.
Okay, so that was what, 40% in that bucket? Now
Yeah,
it's
it used to be 40, 40, 20, and now it's 10, 30.
And that was an attempt to balance out the increases among the groups. Any other questions?
I'd just like to commend staff and thank you for, and also Sue, Mary's group, Sue and her staff for a nice Prop 218. I think it's very, I look forward to hopefully hearing public comment if there's any. We will be having those at meetings in February and March and April. Any questions?
Okay.
No other questions? Then I'd like to introduce Tom and Sean with so Tom Gould with HDR and Chuck Horn. I don't know who wants to get the clicker.
Good evening, President Benson and the board. Hopefully I'm not too familiar of a face to you, but I'm Tom Gould with HDR Engineering. And I'm going to start the presentation. John said he wanted to just set a framework. We basically built the entire study here, it looks like. So I think we'll try and skip over some of these slides as quickly as possible because they may be a little bit repetitive, but that's great. John did a fantastic job of sort of setting up the discussion. But we do want to go through this to the point of giving you an understanding of the comprehensive nature of what we undertook, along with the steps along the process and our findings, including the recommendations to you. As John mentioned, there are 3 steps to a comprehensive rate study process. We're going to talk about each one of these. The first step is called revenue requirements, and in that we do look at the revenues that are coming into the utility and the expenses. And we look at that for a 10-year period, and Sean will talk a little bit about that. And that establishes the overall adjustment to rates. Now, we look out over a 10-year period, but the reality is we're focusing on a 1-year period in terms of establishment of your rates. The next step is called cost of service, and we try to equitably allocate the cost between the various customers that are served by the district. And Sean will talk about the summary results of that, and then we'll talk about rate design. And there's 2 sets of rates that we're going to talk about, which are the, quote, normal water rates, and then also the water shortage rates that you have. Now, there are a number of study goals and objectives that come out of this process, and John did a really good job of summarizing those. But again, we want to have rates that are cost-based, fair, and equitable. Those are traits that the district has had for a long time. As long as I've worked with the district, those are really paramount. But these issues change over time. One that has been important over the last few years is revenue stability. And what utilities across the United States have seen is declining per capita consumption. It's a function of a whole bunch of things, but it does cause some financial issues for utilities. So one of the ways that we want to address that within the study is by looking at revenue stability and the mix of fixed charges to variable charges. We also want to talk about that temporary infrastructure charge, talk about the sunsetting of that, and also just to maintain our adequate revenues to make sure we meet our debt service coverage. And again, Just to be clear, that is a legal obligation to maintain your rates at a sufficient level to assure repayment of that debt. It's a very important measure and one that really drives a lot of the results of the study. And we also want to provide adequate funding to take care of the system that we have in place today. And as you all know, infrastructure is an important thing to maintain over time. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sean, let him go through the study. He did the vast majority of the work here. So, Sean?
Thank you. As Tom said, I'll walk through some of the different analyses that we put together, and I'll start with the revenue requirement. And as Tom said, we took a look at the 2012-13 budget period. That was our starting point, and then we projected out over the next 10 years. And we project out both revenues and expenses separately. We project the revenues based on estimated growth, project our expenses based on assumed inflation or escalation factors that we put together over time. The focus was, as Tom said, on the current budget period. So what is the impact to rates based on this current budget period? And really, what are those, excuse me, prior policy impacts on the projection of our revenue requirement? We want to make sure we maintain those adequate debt service coverage ratios, make sure we're funding that existing debt that we need to fund from the ratepayers, and making sure that we're adequately funding our renewal replacement, both for the district's asset and the district's share of Durham assets. So as we take a look at this, starting point was the current rates today. So that was stage 1, 2013 rates, and the temporary infrastructure charge, which for a typical single-family residential home is $9 a month at this point. We do also build into this the replacement and expansion fund piece. Essentially, it's just our check to make sure that there's sufficient funds in those two funds that we're not impacting rates from there. And under this case, any fund. In this case, that is where we are. We're not funding anything in replacement or expansion through rates. Those are all funded through the cap fee and the transfer from rates. The Zone 7 charges are excluded. Those are the pass-through to the customers directly on the bill. So we take those out of the analysis. So we're truly trying to get down to the district's expenses to operate the utility. We also use what's called the cash basis approach. If there's accountants in the room, that's not the accounting cash basis technically. It's our rate sheet exception to that. And what we do is we take a look at three components. Our O&M expenses, which is based on the district's functionalized budget of personnel expenses, materials and supplies, etc. We add in our annual debt service, and we add in our renewal and replacement funding. That gives us our total revenue requirement needs for the district. We back out miscellaneous revenues. That gives us our balance required from rates. And really that's what we're trying to achieve here is what is the balance or deficiency in annual rates that we need to adjust rates to reflect. This is the summary here on this slide of the revenue requirement analysis. And it's split into two pieces. The top half is our sources of funds or our revenues coming into the district. The bottom half is our expenses of the district. You can see, and this is 2013 budget year, we've got approximately $11.5 million of revenue coming in. That's based on stage 1 rates, the temporary infrastructure charge, our recycled water, and then other miscellaneous revenue sources. Then we start backing out our annual expenses, which include about $8.5 million of total water operating expenses. Our debt service, which is two pieces. The first piece is the existing ratepayer share of annual debt service. And the second piece is the required revenue to maintain that 1.2 debt service coverage ratio. So that's what makes up our debt service line. The last piece of our three pieces of the cash basis for our revenue requirement is the transfer of funds for infrastructure replacement. That's the transfer to the replacement fund and the DURWA component for the recycled water infrastructure. So in total, for 2013, we've got expenses of $11.9 million. So we have a deficiency of funds of approximately $471,000. That's roughly the 4% that John was referring to earlier in his presentation. So this is our cash basis approach to funding the district's water utility. So the summary and conclusions of that, we do need an overall rate adjustment at this time to reflect those expenses for the budget year, primarily to meet our debt service coverage ratio. And as you can see here on this slide, before our rate adjustment and not including our cap fees, we have a debt service coverage of 0.76. So we're not meeting that coverage requirement. With the rate adjustment, we hit our 1.2 times coverage. Again, we're excluding our cap fees. We can't necessarily count on those. So we're trying to take the policy level decision here and say we're going to fund our 1.2 through rates. This deficiency was projected over the entire 10-year period. However, that proposed revenue adjustment of approximately $471,000 takes care of that short-term need going forward. Any questions on the revenue requirement before I jump into the cost of service? Okay, I will keep rolling. As Tom talked about, the cost of service is a method to equitably allocate costs between our different customer classes of service. So when we take a look at our cost of service, we've got our single family, we've got our commercial, our irrigation type customers, and really there's no way to account for that on a budgeting cycle, essentially. We don't know what costs were incurred specifically to meet the residential customer's need or the irrigation customer's need. So a cost of service takes a look at how the customers utilize the system based on things like their average day use or how much water they use typically on an annual day, and what their peak use is on the system, or how big do we have to size the system to meet their needs. So we take those into consideration as we review the district's costs and allocate them to each of the different customer classes. This is a snapshot and a point of time. So we're looking at 2014 budget year projected expenses and looking at current consumption and customer numbers. So this is just our caveat here that things change over time. So it's one of the things when we look at the cost of service, we try and say if it's within a range of reasonableness, then it makes sense, because we know customer consumption can change over time, the number of customers can change, and that can have an impact on our cost of service study. Really what we gain out of the cost of service is that comparison of current costs per customer class compared to current revenues. But the other piece that comes from this is the unit costs, and those are helpful when we design rates. See how much it costs on average to serve our different customer classes. As I said, we allocated 2014 projections to develop the cost of service. The reason we do that is that really ties to the time period that we're looking at setting rates for. We're having a July 1 implementation. This ties to that same time period we have. We utilize generally accepted methodologies. Our backup is the American Water Works Association M1 Manual of Principles of Rates and Fees. And that really gives us an idea of how we should think about allocating and classifying costs to different customers. But what we do is we take that, and that's not our cookbook, we don't use that exactly. We actually look at the district's specific operations, how the district's customers use water, how many customers there are, things like that, to allocate those costs proportionally and equitably to the customers. We use the district's current rate schedules, so the current customer classes that you have out there that we've used for the past several years in setting rates, so we propose no changes there. So as we go through this process, what we do is allocate costs to the different customer groups. And this is a lot of numbers up here, and it might be small on your sheet too that you have. But we split it up by our customer classes: single family, commercial, irrigation, and private fire. And we compare the current revenues, or what are they paying today through rates, to the allocated cost from the cost of service. And so when you take a look at the difference, the percentage on the right-hand side is what we try and focus on. And so what we say is that single family, it looks like there's a deficiency of funds of 6.8%, commercials minus 2.4, 9.3 for irrigation, and 2.7 for private fire. The overall system is our 4.9. That is our benchmark for how we want to take a look at these classes. And what we say is if a class of service is within plus or minus 5% of that overall, so between 0 and 10% roughly, they're paying their fair share. That's because we're looking at one point in time, one set of customer information data, one set of consumption at this point. So really, if all of our rate studies would look like these results, Tom and I would be very happy campers, because these look really good. This is a really clean, what I'll call cost of service. everybody's pretty much within that range that we would like to see. So there were no oddballs. The one that is outside of it a little bit is commercial. What we could deduce from looking at the information is that's really a driver of a lot of those customers have separately metered irrigation. So their peak demands on their indoor use are lower. So there's not as much of a peak cost being allocated to them in this study. Kind of already drained the slide here, so I'll hit the bottom line here. At this point, we wouldn't recommend any cost of service adjustments. One, it's the first cost of service completed since 2003, so it's 1 point of data this time. We like to see a few more trends out there before we really start jumping to the cost of service results. But one of the things we're doing as part of this study is we're increasing the revenue stability piece of that. And as part of that, we may see some shifting of revenues and costs between the different customers. So I think by the proposed rate structure, we actually may achieve some of our cost of service results as you go forward and take a look at this in the future. Any questions on cost of service before I jump into rate design? All right. As both John and Tom talked about, our one main goal was to try and increase the revenue stability of the utility, and we've done that by increasing our fixed revenue up to that 25% level. Now, there's a lot of questions about how much should we be collecting through our fixed charges. And one of the things we take a look at is, does this still meet the definition of a conservation-based rate? And under the California Urban Water Conservation Council, our CUWCC there, one way they define that is that you're collecting no more than 30% of your revenue through the fixed charge. So we're still within those bounds. The district's a signatory to some of the best management practices that the CUWC has out there. So we're still maintaining the conservation incentive. We're still meeting those BMPs. Now, the one thing, as we talked about, is we did revise the residential rate structure. We haven't changed anybody else. It's just a matter of shifting those block sizes. And the proposed rates target that revenue need, so that additional $471,000, that's what we're trying to pick up from our different customer classes. Again, no cost of service adjustments. We've taken out the temporary infrastructure charge, and we're not proposing any other changes. And then based on our, what we'll call our normal rates, then we can develop the drought surcharges. And so we kind of, step one is calculate the rate, step two, calculate what those drought surcharges are going to be. So here's the actual proposed rates on the left hand, present and proposed rates. On the left-hand side, you've got the present rate with the bi-monthly service charge and the consumption charge. The right-hand side is our proposed rate, bi-monthly rate, with again, the bi-monthly service charge and the consumption charges. The present rates include the stage 1 rates and the TIC. The proposed rates are the proposed normal rates that we have now. And as we talked about, as John alluded to, you can see on our fixed charges, on our bi-monthly service charge for a 5/8, the top, it's currently $26.12 bi-monthly. The proposed is $31.75. The trade-off, as he mentioned, is down in our consumption charges. We changed the block from 0 to 20 and 89 cents to 0 to 10 and 50 cents. So we've tried to reduce that first block price to reflect that necessary indoor water use for that 10% of those customers that we know stay below that, to try and give that price incentive there. The other thing this chart does not include is Zone 7. This excludes that. That would be in addition to this, as well as the energy charges, the pump charges that are out there as well. So how does this impact our customers? Ties right along with John's numbers. You can see the person that uses 10 units is $1.73 bi-monthly. This does include the Zone 7 charges here. So this chart does include those water charges from Zone 7. And you can see as you go out into the higher end of the chart, you can see it drops, as John was talking about. And that's a result of decreasing those consumption charges as we increase the fixed charge to maintain that revenue target. Present and proposed commercial rates, same thing. Present rates on the left-hand side, which includes the 2013 Stage 1 and the TIC. Proposed rates on the right-hand side, again, no Zone 7 charges. You can see the fixed charge change, and then also our consumption charges have been able to drop a little bit on our winter-summer time period. So you have similar results here for commercial customers. Present proposed irrigation rate, same, just keep saying the same thing here, same story. We've maintained the current rate structure, we've increased the fixed charge and then decreased that consumption charge. So we target our revenues from our revenue requirement analysis. So once we've got our normal rates, then we are able to develop our drought surcharges. And so we have 4 different stages. We have a stage 1, which is a 10% target reduction goal. Stage 2 is 20% reduction goal. Stage 3, 35%, and then stage 4 is 50%. And so we've got a mix here of how we're trying to attain this conservation or this reduction in use. And part of it is through public outreach, education to gain that reduction. The other piece of it is through the pricing incentive. So that folks aren't responding to the public outreach, then the bill will reflect that, and hopefully that gives the signal to reduce usage. So as an example, for the single family, we've got our normal water rates at 50 cents for the first block, $1.05, and then $1.40 per 100 cubic feet or CCF. As we go into stage 1, you can see how those rates increase. That's based on trying to achieve a reduction of 10% through public outreach and education. As you start going into the later stages, you can see the price piece really picks up, and that is we're trying to get the elasticity of demand or the response to the price so that folks will reduce their consumption. Same thing for commercials and irrigation. It's based on that current normal rate, that rate structure, and then we adjust it for the public outreach and education savings and the price savings throughout there. So these would be in addition to the normal rates under the drought, as John spoke about. As you adopt the rates, these would be a piece of that, and then as you determine what level you're at, either normal or a drought stage, those would be implemented.
Sean, maybe before you go on, there's one correction. The numbers here, if you would comment on that.
Yeah. Are these both the same? Oh, yeah. So there is one correction to the report. At this point, we had a bust in our translation here. So we're handing out the new pages to that. And the difference is in the irrigation rates here, this bottom line, they weren't tying out to how we had our policy level for how they tie back to our residential rates. So these reflect the new or revised, where they should be, irrigation drought surcharges.
And I thank Vicki for catching that,
Yes.
because what we saw was, before the correction, the irrigation rates were lower than the tier 3 rate, and that didn't appear to be appropriate. So what you have in front of you corrects that.
And this is how it was during the last analysis for the drought surcharges, the same thing tied to that tier 3 or block 3 rate. Just adjust for that. So our proposed rates both were designed to reflect the goals and objectives, primarily the revenue stability and making sure that we could maintain our adequate debt service coverage ratio. The rates would meet the district's projected operating and capital needs. And the proposed single-family rate structure reflects that change in the rate structure, the block sizing that we have. And then we've updated the water shortage or drought rates to reflect that. The one rate that we haven't touched on, John touched on 2 of the rates that weren't changing, which was the energy charge and the Alameda County rate. The one rate that also does adjust as part of this is the recycled rate. The policy level on developing this rate is it's the 90% of the zone 7 plus the irrigation rate. So this rate does adjust as you adopt new rates. So that is the one that we don't have up here as an example that would change that going forward. So just a quick summary. Rate adjustments are necessary primarily to meet our debt service coverage, maintaining our renewal and replacement funding. We recommend no cost of service adjustments at this point, and then we've restructured the residential rate to reflect more of the consumption patterns and the customer usage. And really, I think through that, you may see some cost of service shifts over the next couple of years as this rate structure is implemented, and then we've updated the drought rates. And with that, I'll take, Tom and I will take any questions you have.
Any questions? I do have one question regarding, so you talked about the 1.2 debt service. Are you eventually going to go up to 1.6? I think there's something. Or work towards that?
The 1.2 debt service is per board policy will be met, that coverage test will be met exclusively with rates. To the extent we have any connection fee revenue coming in, that'll add on top of that, and that'll get us to a board policy target of 1.6. The legal requirement is 1.2, which we want to assure that we can meet with just operating costs. That was, if you go back to 2009, that's what triggered the whole temporary infrastructure charge, because we couldn't be making the revenue, we weren't making the revenue.
I thought that perfect. That confirms what I heard. Okay.
Thank you.
Any questions? Okay. Yeah, no comment. And obviously, we're going to be having public comment too available at the next board meetings. All right, well, thank you. Anything else? Board member items? Time for sharing.
We need,
Oh, we need to approve, sorry.
We need 9.B.
well, the other thing we
Sorry.
need to do is for the board to set the public hearing date for the meeting. I think
Oh, there you are.
that would be,
Set the public. And that's going to be April 16th?
we're checking that.
It's in Prop 218. You want this number?
April 16th.
April 16th.
April 16th.
16th. Yeah.
April 16th.
So we're going to set that as a public hearing? Okay. So we need to vote on that.
Probably.
Well, it could be done either way. I think the direction staff, what staff is intending to do is to proceed on the 16th unless they hear differently tonight. So,
My
is it a motion or not? Either way.
No, I don't know if we need a motion. My question was, it's a one-night thing?
Well, the public hearing is a formal public hearing that you have to have before you consider the rates. We're going to be talking with External Affairs about the public outreach program, and actually, I believe, Mary, every agenda or every other agenda, between now and there, we'll have an item for public comment on the rates and for discussion. So,
But then we have the formal hearing and approval on the 16th?
yes, that's.
Because in the Prop 218, it says, how can I learn more? Attend the board meetings on February 19th, March 5th, March 19th, and April 2nd to ask questions and make statements. So we'll be here and ready to listen.
That's great.
Yeah, that's pretty neat.
And then we need item 9B that they.
9B, sorry, my newbiness. Okay, approved public facility planning agreement for studies related to plan of services for Dublin Crossing.
President Benson, members of the board, you can forget me if you would like to. I'd like to start off by introducing Jerry Nakano of West Coast in the audience. I'm sure he's appreciative of you approving the contract extension under the consent calendar, and when you approve this agreement, he'll be going to work. A way of background, Camp Parks has sold 187 acres of Camp Parks to SunCal. It's 182nd acres on the north side of Dublin Boulevard, essentially south of this street. It's important to understand in this project, the district has no role as far as land use planning, deciding to do the project. That's all city's responsibility. Our role is requirement to provide services under both our code and our agreements with the Army. The City of Dublin's planning staff wanted to try to be here tonight to talk to you about the project, they couldn't. And we want to go ahead with this for a couple scheduled reasons I'll touch about, but they will be here at the next meeting to talk about what the project looks like and what they're thinking about development there and housing and commercial and all that. Further in the way of background is we do water master plans periodically, and those take a look at all the major pipelines, reservoirs, pump stations. But within the city's general plan, there's lots of big areas they haven't got a specific plan for yet. We know kind of what the water use is going to be, but we don't know where pipes could be located and all those kind of things. As the city identifies each major area and gets a specific plan for it, then we have to do the detailed study of how the best pipes go, where the water is coming from, how we do all that. And the code is set up so that it has a standard of public facilities planning agreement format, because the developer of that property is responsible for paying for all those planning costs associated with that. So this agreement you see is consistent with code and how we normally do it. All the cost of this work is being paid for by the developer through deposit or Camp Parks, and you can imagine with the Army getting their deposits a little exciting, but that's a different story. It's really, the work has really got three elements that gets into the requirements we have to do, is plus the scheduling. The first element, because of the size of the project, the city is doing an EIR for the specific plan for the site. And because of the size, we have to do a water supply assessment according with SB 610 and SB 620. We essentially have 90 days from the time the city notifies us they need the analysis done to complete that analysis and submit it to the city. And it's a document the board will have to approve. Basically what it says, we have adequate water supply to serve this development. We know we're okay because we already have this project and everything in the urban water management plan, but because that plan is now going on almost 2 years old, we have to update it, be consistent with CEQA. So that's the first requirement. Second requirement, there's a second schedule issue, and the city's a pretty big customer, so we'd like to meet their schedule restraints, is the Army. The way this project is going together is SunCal will get the property in 5 phases. What they'll do is they will build something on parks, so equal value to a phase, property phase. And then the Army will give them that phase so they can start that development. They are starting now in design and want to start construction on the first Army phase, which is the main gate and everything. So the Army is anxious to get this work approved so they can get that going. And so to meet the Army schedule, we also want to proceed with. This is going to be a kind of a little bit more interesting project than some, because we appreciate all the service of Camp Park currently flow through this area. When this is done, there won't be any roads or anything in between the two properties. So how you separate those services and keep going is, from an engineering point of view, I mean, it's not a policy issues involved there, but it's kind of interesting. And so the second part of this is what the pipeline layout and how does the service all get provided, in addition to the water supply to the SunCal development. And again, we take responsibility for doing this because it's our system and we want to be right. And then the third element, of course, is these 5 projects in the Army affects the infrastructure in the Army's base as far as what they need for services and changes. And so part of that will be looking at that, and the Army eventually picks up the bill for that. So the bottom line, and I think the key point to take away is this is the decision to do this project and land use plan, folks. There's no decision about the project. You're just filling your obligation to provide service to the city and their service area, to the Army under their contract. And the second thing to take away is no cost to the district for this work. SunCal provides the deposit, the Army provides the deposit, we work against the deposit. Obviously, if we made the error in deposit, we run out of money, we can stop working until we get more deposits. So we're completely in control. West Coast has done an incredible job on several of these for us. And inevitably, we haven't had a problem with their estimates for the deposits. We've been able to get things done. Sometimes things happen and I had to get more deposits down the road. And so with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions and look forward to get this project going.
If I could say one thing, normally on big projects like this, there's also been a laughable element because it's involved in annexation or a sphere of influence adjustment. In this case, this is an infill project in the context that this territory is fully within the district's current boundary and fully within the district's current sphere of influence. So there's really no LAFCO issue, so you don't have any annexation agreements or processing to go through with that. So that's an element that if you were around when we were doing some of the big projects on the east side or west side, you had that in conjunction with those LAFCO studies to support. We don't have that in this case.
Pace is basically in our lap.
The keywords basically.
Most-
No pun intended.
Basically.
Nothing that affects us.
Okay.
Approximately how much time would it take to complete the report?
The water supply assessment by statute is required 90 days after the district received notice. So technically, we are shooting to try and have that to the board, actually, the water committee sometime mid-March, and for board approval in the April timeframe. So this project needs to move very quickly within the next several months.
When do they anticipate breaking ground?
What's that?
When do they anticipate breaking ground?
Well, the Army anticipated breaking ground on their first development project in the next couple of months. Now, having said that, the developer probably won't break ground for 6, 8, 10 months, depending on what the process is to get the general plan amendments, city plan approved through the city. They're just preparing the EIR. The EIR will be put on the street. All the elements as they get the study and there'll be a review process. So I would be surprised if this time next year they've broken ground, but they may be starting by then.
That sounds about right.
Yeah. And this will be spread over a number of years, go with 5 phases.
5 phases.
It'll go faster or slower depending on availability of money and how fast they're able to sell things to get money for the next phase of the Army.
Because it's land for infrastructure.
Each phase, it's developer builds something for the Army first, and then within this.
Then they get a piece of property, that's
Yeah,
correct.
back and forth, back and forth, five.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, so do I hear a motion? Oh, no motion, it's a resolution.
Need a motion to approve the resolution.
Motion to approve the resolution. Do I hear a motion?
And the only one?
Did you do it, Jackie?
I did second, yes, I'm sorry. I'll go.
Okay. Who made the motion?
I,
Okay, Pat, and then Georgine seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so now we can do board member items.
I'm here.
Pat? Ed?
Well, I just wanted to report to the board that I attended board member training on January 15th. And after the election, Carl was kind enough to give me a letter outlining all of my legal duties and responsibilities I needed to be with. And the gentleman who conducted the seminar expanded on that somewhat. So it was covering everything from the Brown Act to penalties for lying, not disclosing your finances, and it was an eye-opener. It was quite an eye-opener. A very good instructor. It was a full house. I think there was close to 30 people there. And great benefit to me. And I know that I'll have to provide a written report to the board, which I will be doing very shortly.
All right.
I have 2 to report on. On January 9th, and it seems funny because it seems like I had reported this before, but we haven't had a board meeting, so I guess not. January 9th, the Alameda County Special Districts meeting was held here, and Don and Bert gave the opening brief overview and welcome, and then Tim came in and welcomed everybody. The normal business, of course, was carried on, but the speaker was a gentleman by the name of Troy Bourne from Continuing Life Communities, which is the developer for the new senior housing project just at the end of Stone Ridge Extension, whenever that happens. Maybe it has. Anyway, it was that was very enlightening. The places start at $400,000 and go up from there, and you must pay cash for the house. And then depending on how many services you want to buy into, it's $2,000 or $3,000 or $4,000 a month if you want the full boat with the tennis and the golf course and the whole thing. So it really sounds wonderful, except for the $4,000 up front. They don't
400,000, I should say. They don't finance any of that, you have to pay cash. But upon your death, the family gets 75% of that back. So there's something there, and they really have gone much more than we've been used to in our senior housing in this area, to include all of the things they could possibly want. There's almost no reason for them to leave, the seniors to leave the area for anything. They'll have doctors there and all the various care. So that was an interesting presentation. And then on January 16th, I went to the CASA meeting in Palm Desert. This was an interesting kind of meeting because I've never felt sort of out of my element, that it was being too technical and I didn't understand everything that was being said. But this one was very technical. It was difficult to follow stuff, and I even commented to Bert and he agreed. So it was definitely for the people that are into the specific topics that were covered. One neat thing was this complete shift in how we should be looking at our wastewater treatment facility, in that it's a resource now. It's not at all considered, or not even called, any kind of a burden. It's a resource for power, it's a resource for additional water, and they're really, CASA's really pushing that with, of course, the help of the bigger agencies around. So that part was very interesting. I did enjoy the time. Tom and I took an extra day on Saturday and went to downtown Palm Springs and saw the 50-foot statue of Marilyn Monroe, and ran into, I knew I was going to do this, Mark Hilgenberger from CSI, and the golf tournament was on, and so we had several of the amateurs who are usually sports figures or actors staying at our hotel, so that was kind of fun. And then we flew home with Hell's Angels, so it was just a very interesting trip, all in all. So that's all I have.
Excellent. I too went to this California Special Districts. Since we were here, we hosted it. So staff, once again, thank you so much for everything that you did to make it such a warm and welcoming event. Everybody thoroughly enjoyed it. The speakers were wonderful, and Tim was really enthusiastic, and he's basically our cheerleader here for Dublin. And I too was pretty interested in the presentation on the Stone Ridge Creek.
Yes.
Stone Ridge Creek facility, since we've experienced that for our family, and it's kind of a neat thing, especially when they buy it back for 75% at the end of the term. So, but anyway, with that, I think I have nothing else to say. Okay, meeting adjourned.
Free to do.
I know, I have it.
Okay, good luck. Yep.
Yes.
Yes.